So we are here to talk about one of the points or a couple of the points in the funnel, really, which is pipeline mismanagement and how it impacts upstream, downstream. I'm going to kick it to my illustrious panelists before I introduce myself. Dailah, do you want to go first?
Hello, everybody. I'm Dailah Lester, and I am the VP of Revenue Operations at Seeq. Actually, I've only been there going on 5 months now, but I have a long career in the startup world and in building and running revenue operations functions. Excited to be here talking about pipeline management as every time I land at a new company, it's new challenges. I look forward to discussing that with everybody.
Wonderful. Austin?
Yeah, great to be here as well. Austin Brusse. I run revenue operations at Coalesce, based in Portland, Oregon, so not too far from you all. Yeah, really excited to be here. I've been with Coalesce now for a little over 2.5 years. Started really small, just a handful of customers, and the past few years have been really exciting. So can speak in terms of rapid scale and ways in which we've been able to partner with our business leaders as well to really help manage pipeline.
And I'm rounding out the West Coast contingent, also in Seattle. Camela Thompson, head of marketing at the RevOps Co-op. Don't let that fool you, though, because before going to marketing, I was in ops for 15 years across sales, marketing, and customer success ops in companies from early stage startup to Fortune 100. So I will be trauma sharing as well. So I did want to cover what we are and are not covering, what's out of scope. One of the places I always recommend people that I'm coaching career-wise in operations that they look at is the handoff between teams because it gets you exposure into the other systems. We are not covering that today. We're going to be pretty hyper-focused on pipeline hygiene, the infrastructure to put in place. And that's where we're going to spend most of our time is on the fix because we're assuming that a lot of folks on this call are already really familiar with the pain. That said, we're going to touch on it really quickly and what the benefits are. So either of you want to touch on any of these points on what clean pipeline can do? Have you seen it at past companies? What does that feel like?
First, Austin, you want me to?
Sure. I'd say that in terms of how data-driven your company is, if you don't have your actual, whether you're using Tableau, Power BI, Sigma, whatever you're using to actually make decisions for the business, it all starts at the actual quality of the pipeline. Having reps make updates, and have different levels of hygiene can really be tough to actually give you a good indication of different programs that you might be running for the business, such as everything from enablement to new go-to-market initiatives to ecosystem selling. So it's really tough to get an actual handle on how well things are going for your business if the actual foundation of your data isn't there. So on the inverse, if pipelines being managed, not only can it help drive decisions and actions that can help whether it's change strategy, change tactics, but it can generally give a pretty good idea of how specific motions are going.
Want to add on to that?
Pretty much summarized it, but
Yeah.
I think from a data perspective, your data is only going to be as good as what you have. So if you have inconsistencies in how your sales team is using and managing their sales deals, then it's going to make it really hard to figure out where to pour resources and help in certain scenarios versus not, such as many organizations I've gone to sometimes where you're starting to look at the pipeline and inconsistencies in the pipeline really make it hard to understand where the problems are and where you're strong and what you need to be focusing on. So I think having gained consistency and having a reliable pipeline is critical from a foundational standpoint.
100%. So here's where it starts to get interesting because there are lots of signs that we have a problem. So, Dailah, I'm going to start with you this time. You're fairly new to your organization. What are the first things you start spotting that need to be tightened up? Like, how do you start picking up on signals that it's never perfect, but we definitely have some kind of a gap here?
Yeah, so I typically will be looking at, we use Salesforce here as I have in most of my companies. And so I'm first off, I'm looking at what's the sales process and then what do they have implemented within Salesforce and how's it being used.
Mhm.
And in most cases, until you get a RevOps team in, it's been implemented and people are using it, but there's inconsistencies in-house. I think I spotted my base challenge when I walked in there was inconsistency in forecasting. And that's usually one of the most prevalent things because forecasting accuracy, if you're head of revenue ops, is critical because everybody's looking at you to provide that. And so not having consistencies in pipeline make it really challenging. So you could have a seller that's committing a deal in stage 3 and I got to commit in stage 6. I'm like, why is this? And so forth. I would say forecasting inconsistencies, obviously not making numbers, things like that is usually the first signs that I'm looking at to say, okay, we've really got to gain alignment on how our pipeline is structured and how we're using our pipeline for driving consistency. I think it's that fundamental that all these other things spin off of.
For sure. Austin, how would you build on that?
Yeah, I'd say the last part totally. It's if you're noticing data anomalies such as aging off the charts, I think that's the biggest one. Days in stage or just the actual age of the opportunity in general can give you a pretty good idea. I'd say days since last update, whether it's a particular forecast category that you're tracking, right? If you have an anomaly wherein you have a deal that's in commit for the quarter, but you're noticing that the stage of the deal is more top of funnel discovery education. I think oftentimes it's a sign that there's a problem with either enablement, which could be maybe reps just don't quite understand how the rest of the business is trying to either forecast or correctly stage your deals. Or I think the big one is that there could just be some fear going on. And I think the two biggest components of fear that could potentially drive mismanagement in the pipeline is twofold. Generally, I think it can be either the rep might be new or they're new in a territory and they're concerned that if they start closing out some deals that maybe should be closed out, that they're going to start signaling to leadership that they don't really have any pipeline, which no rep really wants to signal. So the other one being that if you're noticing, hey, this rep has an 80% close rate the moment a deal enters Salesforce, that could also be a sign that maybe they're sandbagging a bit and waiting to put deals into Salesforce a bit too long compared to the rest of the business. And that's not good for anybody. It's not good for forecasting purposes. It's not good for data quality. So I think really trying to figure out, is it a problem with enablement or is there just some fear driving this? And again, both are opportunities for coaching, but just figuring out where the problem is coming from is big.
And I'd love to see some emoji reactions, but I don't know where this rumor started about opportunity lost rates that salespeople are so scared of. So things just sit in early stages forever. And I like your point about sandbagging too, because as things progress, they know they're going to get more pressure from their managers to update them about those deals and they want to be left alone. But it also, they don't always understand that we're using their ability to forecast and give us a heads up to properly staff the customer success team and figure out what kind of capacity plans we need to adjust in the future. So it can really create a big mess. So one of the benefits of being a consultant is I've had to figure out what are the different things I can look at really quickly to figure out what kind of a problem we have or start investigating what the issue may be. So a lot of these really speak to that reluctance to mark anything closed lost, understanding aging. And then it also helps us myth bust some of the stats that our sales leaders are just at the top of their mind. It's 3.5 pipeline coverage. Is it? Because in a lot of companies, I've seen 11 to 17x pipeline coverage. It just depends on how clean that pipeline is and how familiar we are with the actual data as opposed to what we're hearing in like Harvard Business Review or other publications. Are there any, and then Austin, I know you touched on the crazy high close rates. Great call out again. Are there any other items on this list that you would really want to spend any time on?
Would be curious if anybody in the chat is to see some.
Push count. I mentioned push count, which is also really
that's
really,
always
really
something
great.
I recommend setting up. Yeah, that's a great one. Push counter, which we'll talk about in infrastructure.
Yeah, I would say here at Seeq coming in, one of the typical problems, and piggyback off what Austin said, is we had a tremendous amount of deals sitting in those early stages for ridiculous time periods. And I'm like, this is no longer a deal. It's been sitting here for over a year. And so if you pull, I think, the age and then last activity, I have no problem closing out a mass amount of opportunities because it skews your numbers from a coverage standpoint. I really don't understand exactly how much coverage I have if a certain percentage is not what I quote real opportunities.
Yeah, and that's such a great point. Sorry. One of the great things too to remember about deal scoring is sometimes companies have health scores. Run it on a regular basis as opposed to triggered on action because you want to degrade it over time. So as we get further away from that activity, and you can run a calculation in a spreadsheet or whatever, or have a formula, but if you're using an updated field via flow, just be careful how you're triggering it. Sorry, I cut in, Dailah. Did you have more?
No, that's fine.
Time to event, leverage the opportunity, age to infer statistical likelihood of meeting a target. Yep, that's a great point. Pablo's on a roll. So infrastructure basics, let's talk about this a bit before we get into it. Dailah, can you talk to us about stage consistency across teams?
Yeah, or lack thereof.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things, obviously, and I'm sure most people probably do this, but you come in, you understand how they do business, you identify. Typically, I figure out what the buyer journey looks like. We make sure that we have the right sales process in place. And then last but not least, you align Salesforce and your sales stages to meet those needs. I'm a big proponent of obviously making sure we have date stamp stages so we know this is going to help obviously long run so I can help understand conversion rates, where my deals get stalled, so forth. Identifying within each stage, driving alignment around, okay, what does that mean when you're in that stage? What are you supposed to be doing? And then having your exit criteria, what's your go, no go to move to the next. Just, it doesn't have to be over engineered, but just driving alignment. And that's just working with the sales leaders to validate and get their buy-in on it so that you can just start to put at least some basic structure so that when we say everybody's in stage 3 demo, we all know what that means. We all know what was done prior to getting there, and then what we need to move to the next stage, such as proposal or whatever that might be for your business. So I think just driving alignment there really helps set the stage. It also helps to understand, we have struggling reps, where their deals are sitting, if they're sitting for longer periods of time, how you can help improve their skills in that area or whatever that might be.
And I think what's interesting to call out here is HubSpot does a lot of automated stage stamping. And to be fair, Salesforce has the opportunity history table that also does that. However, if you're wanting to report in app and really pressure managers, I've found it really useful to try to build very flat data structure. So everything on the same table, as opposed to having to try to integrate different tables or do a lot of math to figure out what the minimum dates were to calculate things. So I think that's why I see a lot of revenue operations professionals actually taking the time to build a flow and stamp things out. Now, I would love to open the debate. How do we think about moving stages backwards and accommodating change requests? Because I know we had differing opinions, and I think that's super healthy.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I can open it. I think it depends, and I hate to qualify it this way. I think it depends on the size of your organization. I think if you have, say, organizations less than probably around 250 people internally, and you have a dynamic go-to-market operations type person that may also hopefully be either your HubSpot or Salesforce system admin that could help you with updating those stages if you're ever to move them back. I don't necessarily think it's a bad thing, because reality is, the reason that we're putting this data in Salesforce in the first place is to give an idea to management or to other internal stakeholders where specifically that date is, or where specifically that opportunity sits. An objective measure, right? So whatever your stages are, they should be agreed upon the entire organization. If maybe you were incorrect and thought that maybe this deal was in negotiation or whatever later stage you have it, but you hear back from your champion or other external stakeholder that maybe they got ahead of themselves and first they're going to have to actually run it up the chain and they're going to have to go back a bit. Then if that's where your deal is really at, there's no sense in lying. I think the caveat here is to ask yourself, what's the realistic close date of this deal? If whatever signal came out that prompted you to think maybe you got ahead of yourself and it might be worth backing up a few stages, if that signal is also telling you that this deal may not be within this quarter or next quarter, however many days out, might be time to actually just unqualify the deal because maybe the deal's a little bit less realistic based off whatever new news you heard. And then again, it's always okay to reopen, or not, sorry, not reopen, to open a new opportunity at a more opportune time when maybe this specific engagement gets a little bit more life under the wings. So straddling that is, I think, the magic.
As Camela and Austin know, I am in the camp of no stage going back, but they have convinced me there are reasons. But I am in that stage, and I think usually it's asking, okay, why do you need to move it back? And most times it's because the deal has stalled, is what I've found. And so I'm like, okay, what's a more realistic close date? Because you can always just move it out, just put a more realistic close date. There are instances, and so we've locked it down, you can't move it back. And if there is an instance where it needs to, then they can just make the request to RevOps, the manager, or whatever. And then we have to go, and what we want to do is wipe out the stage dates so you don't mess up your conversion rates and so forth. But when I got here to Seeq, it was a free for all, and deals were moving forward, back, 3 stages back, 2 stage. It was like, and so I had to put a kibosh on it and just say, I can't measure this way. And honestly, there hasn't been a lot of pushback. There just wasn't reasons. And I'm also willing to clone the opportunity. So if for some reason it has, the champions left, and so there's still potential, but we don't know when this deal will come back alive and they really just want to put it back to qualification, then we just close it out and clone the opportunity and start it over. This way they don't lose the deal structure and all the information they've collected up to date. So that's typically how we've handled it. And honestly, I'm going to say reps do it all the time, but when you took it away, it's not the thing that they scream about, honestly. If as long as you just provide, here's how you can manage that and give them the options, it really is not a blocker, in my opinion.
We have lots of comments and questions, and we're going to get to
Yes.
them. I'm loving seeing this. So I probably am somewhere in the middle, and I feel that there should be, I like to put the ownership on management. So if they want to move deals backwards, I have logic built into validation roles and whatnot so that manager profiles or roles can actually make the change on behalf of the salesperson. I think, however, a large part of being in revenue operations, I've always said this, is myth busting and figuring out what exactly is it we're trying to avoid. So there's this, every salesperson I've talked to is extremely afraid of being penalized for close lost rates. And at no company I've ever worked at have we really rigorously paid attention to this. We want to make sure they have enough pipeline and that their close won rates are decent and that they're meeting their number. If they're meeting their number, I don't care how many opportunities they're closing. If the inside sales team is giving them leads that aren't aligned with their idea of qualification, close them out. That's great. We did have some questions, though. I'm going to go straight to what does the panel think about skipping stages forward?
That is a great question. I think under an ideal world that wouldn't happen, but again, context is important. Was your sales rep out for a few weeks and they had somebody fill in that wasn't updating their opportunities for them? So there's always going to be edge cases, right, where it might happen. But I think by and large, if you're running a tight opportunity, shouldn't necessarily be allowed. There are, I can think of a few other edge cases. If your organization's really engaged in like ecosystem-based selling, so you leverage a lot of partners or resellers, and maybe you're hearing back less, maybe the communication channels aren't as immediate because then there's some lag time there. It might be a few weeks before you hear back because it was a few days before that partner heard back from that particular customer. So there's always going to be times when it might feel like you need to skip a stage necessarily. But I think, again, context is important in having the conversation with management or operations Again, a lot easier at a smaller company. The larger the company, it can be tough to get the blessing to do, but context.
I really strongly feel that our systems should be flexible enough to support things. However, I want to put a lot of pressure on management to regulate and coach. So if we do skip stages and we've talked to the management team and they're okay with it, I want to make sure that my automation and date stamping is I'm stamping the same date for the prior stages. And that way they're showing as 0 days in that stage. So it's really easy for me to construct a report and send that to the management team and say, hey, I noticed that you're moving opportunities back several stages a lot. And here are the deals and here are the patterns I'm seeing. Maybe you should coach this person on what those stages mean and the qualification steps. I do advocate for flexibility within reason, but I also want to give restricted access to do so. If they want to move things back, they have to go to their manager and ask them to do that. And that's a great opportunity for a conversation. I don't like putting the ownership on the operations team because that feels like I'm punishing my team for a sales manager not coaching their sales rep on the process. I also want to keep in mind, though, that buyers are unpredictable. They like to hold their cards back, and sometimes we don't know exactly what's going on. But Dailah, would be really curious to hear where you fall on that spectrum.
Yeah, and I'm looking at a lot of the comments, and I have to agree with a lot of what folks are putting in there. We have stage gates in ours today, just really light touch, but it's just more of ensuring that we're capturing the critical information that we need to move the deal forward, such as revenue. One of the things that we were struggling with, ensuring our quotes are getting added to the system. We were having sales orders and order forms go out with no quotes in the system. So there are things that have been put in place just to ensure we're capturing the most critical information, who our competitors are. Any piece of data that this is really important. It's important because it's important to the seller, not just because it's important to the business, right? So information that's going to help the seller is really what we're looking at, because if I'm going to ask a sales rep to put anything in my CRM system, I need to make sure that they're getting something out of it. And we just were recently, they didn't have any dashboards in Salesforce to really understand how they were managing their pipeline in their business. Inconsistencies didn't really allow us to do that. And now they have got some really nice dashboards, which really helps the managers, coaching, the seller to know exactly, hey, here's one spot, here's all your MQLs you have, here's all your net new opportunities that were generated, like all in one spot, which really, those are the give take. If you're asking for information, you want them to complete, give them tools that'll help them be better sellers. And so I'm a big advocate. You can't essentially skip stages in our system because they're gated with collecting at least one piece. But if you're managing your opportunity, you have that information. It's nothing that you wouldn't expect them to have. We're not asking them to do crazy stuff. I make everything pick list as much as possible, so it's super easy for them to add the data if we need to know some specific stuff. So pre-populate as much as I possibly can based on attributes from like Zoom info. So really trying to give them and push as much information to them that they have, and then the ability for me to auto log activities, anything that we want, just to make it super easy. So it's kind of how I would approach that somebody's commenting, yeah, eliminate. We don't need 10 stages.
No.
Let's make life easier. Somebody mentioned the channel sales, 100% agree, right? Your channel sales deals should be different. Pablo mentioned renewals. I don't have that here, but at my last company, we had a separate sales process for renewals as we did for new logo opportunities. So it was easy to do that. Somebody had mentioned earlier too, how do you differentiate a sales cycle for enterprise versus commercial? And so in our last system, I had two different types. So whether it was a commercial, meaning more transactional, versus an enterprise deal. And this way we could actually measure things differently by knowing what type of opportunity it was. So your velocity is going to be quite different between those two.
And we will be touching heavily on automating. I will mention that my husband's also in operations down the hall there and worked with Dailah. And they did a lot of really great things around call recording software and making sure next steps were automatically updated using AI summary information. There's a lot of things that can be done to take a lot of that administrative, as they like to call it, work off the salespeople. But one of the only updates I got excited about while I was taking my certification maintenance, was the conditional page layout functionality that Salesforce added. And I was like, that's cool. It's elevating the right fields at the right time, which can really help with stage gating and those field qualifications. I do want to go back though and touch on, what does the panel think about an on hold stage when a prospect says this isn't the right timing? I'll let you all go first because I have strong.
Yeah, I saw, actually was reading somebody else's comment about that. Terry's is actually how I would probably prefer to handle this. Again, I think context again here is important. I know I sound like a broken record, but think about it. If you're a majors account rep and you have 15 named accounts that you're able to go after, you may feel more inclined to, hey, if you just get told it's a not right now, but the fear is real that if you close out one of your 15 accounts as not interested, is lost, it's not sending the right signal to management. Again, I think somebody else's point that they brought up, that setting your go-to-market team and your sales org's culture early on, that being honest is okay. That way, if you do close it out, because the reality is, I think that's the right thing to do. If you close out the opportunity, your close lost reason would be nurture or not right now or on hold or whatever you want to call it. But the opportunity, the reality is it should be closed and then opened up again, whether you either clone it or if it's with a new business unit within the org, you just open it up again as a new opportunity would be important. But again, I think context, understanding why reps might be doing certain things. And this is big on the partnership between ops and management itself.
Yeah, it's that myth busting factor. Like, I've had reps tell me they're afraid they're going to lose the account because there isn't an open opportunity on it, things along those lines. Having those conversations is really critical to figure out what's driving the behavior, because ultimately behavior is what's driving a lack of adoption or adoption. I saw a question from Haley, and I did want us to say it out loud because I think it's important, but competitor info, how do we require collecting that? How do we think about that?
Yeah, so I put in the chat, we just have our standard competitors, and for us, it's the primary competitors that we typically compete against, and we just have them in a pick list. So at a certain point in your sales cycle, you should know who you're competing against, and it should be a natural question that you actually are asking. And so but we need to understand at the end of the day, who are we winning against, who are we losing against, so that our marketing team is more informed, whether that be battle cards, different positioning, different messaging, but so that we can really provide the enablement needed to the sellers in compete situations. So we only ask for that specific, and we ask for primary and secondary because many times there's more than one. And then there is an other field. So if it's other, then they just have to, there's a text box for them to put that information in if they select other. But I feel like that's something they're asking anyway, or they should be. They should know who they're competing against in a deal.
And I think this is where AI could potentially help us too, with call recording software and snagging names and automatically appending data. There are some vendors coming out with some really interesting technology. I do, and I apologize for pronunciation here, but Katiuska asked how metrics vary between long sales cycle enterprise deals and short sales cycle. So how the metrics vary. Dailah, you had a great point about classifying the deals differently, so it's easy to segment them in reporting. But I do want to call out that you're going to see longer time in stages, particularly probably negotiate or contracting and proposal, because you're working with an organization that probably has somebody dedicated to negotiating contracts. Conversion rates should be higher. The deal volume should be lower. What other things are we seeing with enterprise versus maybe SMB?
I'd also say dollar value is going to be probably significantly lower on the SMB side. And as you said, volume higher on the SMB side versus enterprise. I'd also say probably maybe less important to drive as much of an emphasis on specific validation rules. It's tough because they're still going to be there, such as who is the champion, right? So even if you are working with a small organization and deal volume's higher, you still need to get it. But maybe in terms of like pipeline reviews or one-on-one with management, not necessarily where we're driving as much emphasis. My take would be that probably the more important thing is what are your committed next steps? Do you have time on the calendar? Time obviously kills all deals, but more specifically in the commercial side, just trying to run a quick, tight deal. There's a reason why typically dollar values are lower because you're trying to stay under a threshold for a business that probably has a lot lower of a budget, but still understanding those things. What is the threshold before we'd have to go to your manager? Can we align with InfoSec early? So typically all the validation rules are still going to be there, but I probably wouldn't spend as much time on them in terms of one-on-one pipeline reviews. It would be more, again, next steps and how are we moving along?
And I think some of the ML forecasting models have corrected for this. But again, if you're scoring deal health within Salesforce, the last activity date that isn't counting, or the system date updates, they don't count as field updates that trigger a flow or some other kind of automation if you're still using workflows or process builder, which is deprecated. But make sure you're running those on a periodic basis and not just on field update. So I do want to talk through stage logic really quickly, and then we're going to get into automation outside of flows. So what I really encourage people is to run reports and look at whether there's earlier stages with an empty date field, or you've allowed rolling back, but you forgot to clear out the dates that are in future stages, or you mark it closed lost or closed won, and that clears out all the stage stamps. So I just encourage people to do a little bit of auditing on a regular basis to make sure that their flows are operating as expected instead of assuming that the data is healthy. Is there anything else y'all would like to call out here?
I would say one kind of item that I overlooked here was when our deals were moved to close lost, the close lost date was actually not updated to the current date. It was still stayed at the date. And all of a sudden I realized my closed lost analysis was not accurate because it had brought to my attention, I realized, oh my gosh, I have, I don't know how many, it was like 600 and some odd deals with closed lost dates in the future because they didn't update on the date we actually moved it to closed lost. So those are like little things that matter. So it was obviously an easy fix when we were able to go back in retro and rerun the numbers, but because we had obviously the date, but things like that as you're doing your cleanup and getting ready to make sure that you have the right dates and stuff in there.
Austin, I'm going to let you take the show here and run point on this and the next slide.
Yeah, absolutely. This is an exciting topic for me. Let's talk rattle. So this is important for me because you can do as much pre-work as you want, but until you actually start firing up opportunities and actually running your sales process without a good sample set of data, it's going to be tough to actually drive any insights. In particular, I'm very fortunate here. The actual partnership that I have with the business, our VP of Sales North America, as well as our CMO, both spent a healthy amount of time at some of the leading BI tools that are out there. So they see things through a very good lens that's important in order to make sure that we're actually taking the appropriate steps ahead of time, as well as when we're actually running our sales processes, we making sure that we're updating sales reps when particular fields within our ops are either out of date or just blank. So in terms of automation that we actually leverage internally in order to make sure that we're avoiding having deals go stale or getting stuck in stages or missing things such as no next steps. The first thing that we do is that when we notice a particular problem within the data. So we're noticing, hey, there's a trend where deals aren't getting their next steps updated once they reach a certain stage. Reps start to slack a little bit, right? Because it clears the first validation rule that might be, hey, you have to have next steps logged on the opportunity in order to move from, call it education to scoping. but you don't want to validation rule them to death, right? So you may not have it later on showing, hey, was this particular stage updated? So as much as you can leverage automation such as Rattle to actually meet your reps where they're working, which for the most part is probably Slack or Teams. For us, it's Slack, to actually notify them of, hey, this particular deal is out of date. The first one would be working with sales leadership to identify what are the actual mission critical fields that we need to gather on the opportunity in order to have a successful sales organization. For us, big one is, excuse me, is the 3 whys and then next steps. MedPick depends on the specific segment. Enterprise majors is going to be a lot more important, but 3 whys is huge. Next steps, again, are huge. So first, identifying which fields are absolutely mission critical, and then nudging reps in Slack or Teams that a specific opportunities fields are either stale, blank, need updating. So that is actually connected. So we leverage Rattle to connect it directly from Salesforce to Slack. Down below, you'll see a specific message that would go out to an opportunity owner, letting them know, hey, sales rep, the close date for blank opportunity is in the past. Please update this opportunity in Salesforce with an accurate close date. Directly within that message that they'd receive, we'd actually allow them to update the close date specifically, or like directly within Slack, which is great. Or they can click out and directly view the opportunity in Salesforce, which again is great. And then if that particular action doesn't happen that we want, you could then nudge their manager, right? You could then nudge them and their manager in a group chat, starting directly with the opportunity owner and then escalating as necessary. But leading things in Salesforce and just relying on your reps in order to go and perform Salesforce hygiene can be tough. In particular, if your reps have really large territories and a ton of items that you're asking them to cover, it can be tough. They have a lot of work that they're doing. So bringing it directly to them in Slack right when it happens, striking while the iron's hot, is going to drive a lot more action. At least that's what we've seen. So big fan of that. And then I have a few other examples on the next slide. And these are more related to specific go-to-market initiatives. So pipeline management at the enterprise and majors level, I don't think should fall solely on the sales director themselves, right? If you're, again, engaged in ecosystem selling where you're leveraging partners, your alliances team needs to help. We're very fortunate that we have a really good alliances team that's been in our space and arena for a while that are very well engaged with the variety of partners that we have, and whether that's specific technology partners or SI partners, relying on them to actually help to make sure that these fields are up to date. It's big. So in this example specifically, we have an example saying, so Rattle will send a notification via Slack to the alliances team, whether it's one person or the entire team. For us, like 3 to 4 people, it'd say, hey, alliances team, this opportunity moved to a validation or greater stage, and the SI referred in field is blank. So SI referred in is a big one for us. If we're working with a very large corporation, we want to make sure that we're reciprocating referrals. We get a lot of referrals from our great partner network. We want to make sure that we're at least bringing up partners if it's applicable, if there's an opportunity to get a partner engaged. So if that field's blank, this opens up our partner team, basically signals to them, you either need to have a conversation with the sales director to ask, is there a reason why we haven't referred in a specific partner? Or maybe it just has them start thinking about a particular partner that would fit this specific type of account. That's the specific message that would go out in that case. And then to the right, there's another example. I like this one a lot because it keeps things really dynamic between sales leadership and the sales director themselves. We have a field called sales leadership comments. We also have a field called sales leadership comments history that gets stamped whenever there's an update to sales leadership comments. So what happens is if our VP of sales is doing a pipeline review async, because we have coverage across all these different time zones, if he's doing a pipeline review and he notices, hey, this specific deal, so this one I have is, so if he's doing his own pipeline review ad hoc, he could be looking for a variety of things such as, hey, based off of the stage, based off of the close date, I feel like X might need to be updated. Or I was listening to a gong call and it sounded based off his most recent comments that we're a bit farther away from the MSA than we think we are. So you need to update X field, right? And so this enables our VP of sales to log a specific comment that will immediately notify the sales rep hey, here's the message that your VP of sales just dropped in. Would you like to add a comment? And then they can go in, sales rep can add their own comment, and then the VP of sales is notified that there's been a comment there. So it takes back and forth directly in context of the deal itself. You can bring over whatever fields you want. You can say, hey, here's the deal we're talking about. Here's the close date as it sits in Salesforce. Here's the dollar amount. Here's the segment. Here's the partners. Whatever you want to do. We try to just limit it to the necessary fields to keep that message clean and concise. But that, again, is a great one. I think bringing things out of Salesforce while the iron's hot is the biggest way to actually drive change that you want. Because if you're just looking at this on pipeline review calls, whether that's once a week, twice a week, once every other week, it's a lot to update all at once. But I think small bites is probably the best way to go about this.
I do like your point about letting them update where they prefer to work as opposed to forcing something that they're having a hard time using. However, that point stands. I love it. I have walked into an organization, and it didn't stay this way, that had 20 validation rules on the opportunity, rendering the opportunity basically useless. So Dailah, I would love to have you speak a bit about how you work with the executive team to determine what's nice to have and what's need to have in terms of information.
Yeah, so I think for us, so we use MedPick too. And so I think for us, it's like, what are those? And this, I'm in process manufacturing software. It's a brand new industry to me. Who we sell to, our buyer personas is very new to me. So I'm still in the learning mode. So I do need to rely heavily on the sales leaders. And so it's really just having like an interview process with them to really understand what moves the needle and then what information and is most important. You have to have buy-in from your leadership in building any of this. This is not built from my perspective at all. This is 100% driven. And I usually try and take our top sellers, understand why they're successful, what have they done. They're usually my best resource, even more so than the managers, because I feel like they're on the ground and they have a more realistic approach. And if I can get them on, then they become my advocates. They're my champions. They help sell things internally for me. And if I can use them anytime I'm doing any net change, I'm not the one that's presenting the change. I make sure it's one of the sellers who can tell a story about why they're doing it, how they're doing it, why it matters. And that's, I think, the best way that I've driven adoption for any of the changes I'm trying to invoke at a company that's helped me get things over the finish line. But I love this in what Austin just said, taking some ideas for myself, honestly. I think it's some great ideas. One of the things that we have in a similar manner is we have some very technical pieces of our product that our product team needs to be made aware of if we're selling these components. And we've set up a very similar situation where there's alerts that go out to a Slack channel that notifies our product team anytime one of these is added to a quote and certain conditions. This way we're ensuring that we get the no surprises and that we have validation from our product team that the way in which this product's being sold meets the business needs properly. So there's just a lot of ways to do things. I like the proactive. I think personally, like I said, it's been 5 months, but we have a lot of work to do around AI. I think we've got a little bit through Gong going right now, but I think there's a lot more we can be doing in that. And I think Pablo really touched on it. It really is. How do we make their lives easier? How do we capture the information we want, but meet the sellers where they're at and how they do business? But as anybody who's been doing this knows, sellers do things differently. They all do. So if you ask them how they collect notes from a meeting, you're going to get 10 different. They're all different. So it's really hard then to say, do it this way. So how can we collect what we need in a variety of ways so that they can still do business the way they're comfortable doing business? I'm a notebook person. I still write, but it just depends on them. So I think that's really important. This is super cool stuff.
And in my 20 validation rule example, sales operations reported to the CFO instead of the VP of sales, which changed. But in order to get the validation rules reduced, the CFO's favorite saying is, this is why we pay them a base salary, is for the data. That's not true. That's not why we pay them a base salary. So I had to record several salespeople attempting and failing to create opportunities to show where they were getting hung up. And then I had to make the CFO, away from everybody else, not in front of everybody, sit down and try to create an opportunity before he would agree to reduce the validation rules. So he felt the pain himself. So he had to log in as one of the sales users and try to make an update, and failed several times. So sometimes words aren't enough and we have to show them what they've created from the end user's perspective and remind them that there's a lot of things these people are doing to be successful, and this should be a really small part. And this circles back to what I always like to say: if it's in Salesforce, I don't care where it happens, as long as it's integrated, as long as it's being updated, I am a happy camper. So the example of Rattle, the example of Gong, using AI, all of these things are super great tools to reduce the administrative load on the sales team. And everyone's a lot happier. The more data you get them to enter, the better your system is. And this is just one way to do it. Yeah. So other passive logging tricks. So Dailah, would love to talk to you about maybe what you and Lance were doing previously with Gong.
Yeah, so auto-populating task, and it's so funny, Brand. I just wrote a long thing today in regards to this, because we have Gong and getting them auto-logged. Today, our tasks and meetings and stuff are being pulled in from Gong and directly recorded within Salesforce. The challenge that I have is I have no idea what type of meeting it was. So we're not capturing that. So what we did was we basically identified what are the kind of keywords we were looking for so that I could easily log demos, discovery calls, evaluations, whatever is important to your business, a negotiation call. That's going to be up to you. And then within the activities, we created a type. So then at least then I could classify what type of calls or meetings were happening so that we could then better understand that. And we could run the reports to clearly say, okay, this is what's being recorded and this account's had 5 demos and so forth. That was one of the things that we did for our auto recording and logging of that. Action items, we're just starting to use that as far as a summary from the call. So we haven't done it yet, but that is something that's on our implementation.
You may have to talk to Lance again. So
Yeah.
Austin, I would love to circle back to Rattle. I think I saw Pablo's comment about what I would call a clean your room dashboard about all the exceptions, which I've done. Is it aging like wine or cheese? Is a question I love to ask. Austin, have you used for deal escalations and identifying stalls, the concept of a deal room or some kind of like rally call where you're pulling in multiple stakeholders?
Yeah, we're big deal room users. So we use Rattle deal rooms. It's a great place to bring in all the data. The thing I love about it most is based off of specific fields or triggers or stages, that's when you can choose to bring in certain internal stakeholders. So first notification of the deal room creation obviously goes out to the sales director. And then once it reaches a demo stage, we'll bring in the SE. And then fast forward all the way to the end, when we're going through redlining, we'll either bring in legal or InfoSec or our CEO or whomever based off a specific dollar amount. So deal rooms are huge. I think the biggest reason really that drove us to actually adopt them was our reps have pretty big territories and they're working a lot of deals at once. Same thing with our SEs. And so that's a lot of one-to-one communication going on between primarily a sales director and an SE, and then between a sales director and management asking about the particular deal. So you might get the same question 6 different times to the sales director. How's the deal going? What are the next steps? So having, whether it's the Gong summary specifically that will capture your next steps, dropping directly in that Rattle deal room has been super helpful for us. That way management, finance, whomever, legal can go into the deal room, see these are the actual next steps. And for the most part, it's generally pretty accurate, at least in terms of the next steps functionality, what those are for that specific deal, especially when you get late stage and there are a lot of internal stakeholders in that deal room specifically. So it's really helped us with communication for sure.
So I want to make sure that we're at the end of the deck. I want to make sure that if you have a question, please do ask. I do want to remind folks too Feel free to follow us on LinkedIn. Also, please take the survey so we know how to do these webinars just a little bit better going forward. But would love to address any questions if you have them. While we're waiting for our folks to type, each of you, if you could coach your past self starting in RevOps, what advice would you give?
So many learnings.
Don't be afraid to challenge people, especially leaders. You look at the data all day long, they're not as familiar. Ask intelligent questions. Make sure you're right first, but don't be afraid to challenge people. That's what I would say.
That, and I think a lot of the times is the whys, honestly. Why is that important? Why is that a problem? My big thing is, what are we trying to solve? Because a lot of times people are like, let's do this. And you're like, why? And what are we trying to solve is really, I think, one of the things that it really comes out quite often for me, because a lot of times people come up with the solutions, but I'm like, well, what are we really solving for? And what we're solving for and the proposed solution are really aligned. So we're there.
Yeah,
Austin.
I'd agree. I'd say come with the data if you have a specific request. If the data to that specific stakeholder doesn't have the data, pull it up for them, show them, have a healthy conversation. If not enough data exists on that specific topic, just agree to have a healthy feedback loop. Say, we don't really have a ton of data collected. We'll roll this out. We'll meet again in a month. I'll show you the data. And if you still feel strongly about this, whatever that initiative is, we can have a conversation and we can stick to it. Don't be afraid to have a healthy feedback loop is what I'd say.
Love it. Thank you, everyone, for being here, Dailah and Austin. Thank you for sharing your expertise, and I'll see everyone in the community. Thank you.